How's it going, guys? I'm super excited to bring you today a very powerful rogue build, and I've brought in Vestmore, who some of you may remember because he's been playing the rogue and has an absolutely insane build. It's shredding elites and all that good stuff. So Vest, give me a little top level of your build.
Hey, yeah, so essentially, absolutely love the rogue. It's essentially going for a ranged kind of build. The kind of big build at the minute, of course, is more melee, but I figured I'd go for something ranged because I just absolutely love the mobility, the kind of like playing keep away with enemies. But it's very simple, honestly, in concept. Essentially what you do is you build up a ton of stacks with your basic attack. You want to kind of kite mobs, corral them into a nice big group, and then after that you empower your core skill, Penetrating Shot, which is going to just smash through all those mobs and split off into other smaller penetrating shots, which also split off into other shots. It's absolutely insane. You essentially nuke entire screens. It's a massive AoE builds, but it does also do pretty well in single target as well.
I'm actually a little jealous of the rogue. I might have to make one after this and I use this build. So could you just hover over each of the skills? So if anyone wants to just yoink the skills and their modifiers, you can basically see them on screen now. But we will go through the whole skill tree, all of your gear, your specializations, and we'll do a live dungeon run so you can see it in action for yourself. But just before we jump into the skill tree with the whole explanation of the build and how it works, we wanted to say a big thank you to Nvidia for hooking us up with some GPUs so we can play Diablo 4 with DLSS 3. With the power of DLSS 3, it uses AI super resolution to get a massive boost to your frame rate by up to 4 times. We've noticed a big improvement ourselves, so thank you again to Nvidia for juicing up our PCs so we could play Diablo 4 on max settings. But getting back to the build, the link to Mobalytics will be down below so you can see the written version of the build. So Best, why don't you run us through your skill tree, why you've picked each passive and skill, as well as give us a little explanation of how it all works.
So it all starts, of course, with your basic attack. I've opted for Puncture here. You essentially throw out a few blades, 3 of them in fact, and when you do so, you essentially gain back some energy. So it's a really nice way to kind of keep your energy reserves up. Core skills, of course, utilize quite a bit of energy, so this is really important. You can also use Forceful Arrow as well. This allows you to be a little bit further range, because Puncture is about like a bit of a mid-range option. But I preferred Puncture in this case. So you just want 1 point in that, and then we move on to the Enhanced Puncture, which is how you gain the energy from things. So when you crowd control enemies, you get 2 energy back anytime you hit them with the blades. The blades obviously penetrate, so again, you can think if you've got like a massive pack, this really stacks up and keeps our energy nice and topped up. In terms of the kind of choice here, I went for Fundamental Puncture. So this turns the puncture into the 3 blades that I mentioned, and essentially if you hit an enemy or enemies with 2 of the blades, you make them vulnerable for 2 seconds.
Of course, really
vulnerable,
good.
very big mechanic. The rogue is one of those classes that really utilizes vulnerable. It's got a lot of bonuses to vulnerable damage and just other things you can proc off of that. So this is a really reliable way to get vulnerable.
Nice. I'm guessing you want like vulnerable damage as your substat as well. If your basic skill is putting that on enemies, then that's pretty easy substat to build on.
No, 100%. Vulnerable damage is one of the bigger things you want to look out for in your gear for sure. I'll quickly touch on Forceful Arrow. So again, you kind of trade the more damage potential of Puncture and I guess some of the energy regeneration for relative safety. So Forceful Arrow is essentially you fire an arrow out. Every 3rd arrow also makes the enemy vulnerable. So really, really nice. It takes a little bit longer to come online with the vulnerable, obviously, because you have to get 3 arrows out. This potentially could be better, like once you've got a higher attack speed. But with low attack
Right.
speed, I definitely recommend Puncture. If I was going to upgrade this, though, of course, you've got the Enhanced Forceful Arrow, which every third cast is going to make it so that it has an increased crit strike chance. So, you know, more crits. Anything that procs off of crits is going to proc off of this a little bit more often. That's really nice. But then specifically, the split, you're going to want to go for Fundamental Forceful Arrow. This is where your safety comes from. So it essentially knocks back non-elite enemies if they're close. So, of course, once they kind of enter within maybe about 5 to 10 meters of you, you will then knock them back. It allows you to basically just, you know, send anything rushing you, like bombs or melee characters, back away from you. So, you know, you're safe. If they also...
so you have like an alternate choice between those two skills as well. So it depends on your personal preference.
Exactly that. And of course, if they hit another enemy, it knocks them down. A little bit of CC, just really nice. So yeah, essentially, in a nutshell, Puncture for extra damage, but it's a lot more risky playstyle. Forceful Arrow is a little bit safer, but maybe requires a little bit more attack speed to really feel the efficacy of it. And it's safer.
Okay.
Yeah. So moving on to core skills, we have essentially just one, the one where all the magic happens, Penetrating Shot. So this fires out a high-powered shot that pierces through just any enemy it hits, basically doesn't stop, and does a ton of damage. As you can see, between basically 4,000, 5,000 there with my current setup. It does cost a decent amount of energy, but it also has a decent lucky hit chance, so lucky hit stuff can be really nice on this build. Essentially, what that also does is with the Enhanced Penetrating Shot, it deals 10% increased damage each enemy that it pierces. So if you've got a massive pack, as you can imagine, you're, you know, penetrating through, I don't believe this has a ceiling, so if you're penetrating through 10 mobs, the mobs at the end are going to get just destroyed, basically. It's very, very potent.
That's nuts. I just want to say, because a lot of sorcerer things can hit multiple targets, specifically Ice Shards that I'm using has Ricochet, but they deal reduced damage per, like, you know, as it ricochets. So that dealing increased is just nuts.
It's kind of crazy, right? Yeah, Penetrating Shot is a little bit nuts. Fingers crossed they don't nerf it. But yeah, and then in terms of choice here, we go for the Advanced Penetrating Shot. Because when you've got full energy, this is something that's, again, very easy to achieve with Puncture and its energy regen. Essentially, Penetrating Shot will actually slow all enemies that it hits by 50%, which is massive. That's half their movement speed gone. And then my personal favorite is elite enemies are knocked down for 1.5 seconds. So you get into this kind of rhythm where essentially you find like an elite pack and you want to just line yourself up, and maybe for the first 6 or 7 shots with my current like resources and such and my resource generation, I can keep that elite stun locked for a good like 5, maybe 10 seconds, and they just basically cannot fight back. It really helps with the survivability of the builds, and yeah, it's a little bit insane, basically.
I like the sound of that for party play as well. Like, you can just perma stun lock an elite, everyone wails
exactly.
on it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Moving on to the passives, we do only take one in this tree, and that is going to be Stutter Step. Essentially, when you crit strike an enemy, you gain 15% movement speed for 4 seconds. That's with a full investment, so 5% per rank. Now, this is really nice, of course. Rogue is known for its mobility. It's probably the most agile class in the game. And yeah, just being able to absolutely just twing and just adds to your movement speed, it gets a little bit crazy, basically. So, very...
clear dungeons quicker because you run faster as you're hitting mobs than you're running.
Exactly it.
It's kind of nice to have. Increases your farming speed.
No, 100%. And of course, being able to kite enemies because you are a range build, you're very squishy, is very useful as well. Okay, so moving on to our agility skills. So agility skills for the rogue are essentially our mobility skills. I don't know if that's what they're called for the other classes. I've only played rogue.
Different for other classes, I think, yeah. Like, I think theirs for sorcerers defensives. So.
Right, I see. So in this case, this is a bit special. I'll kind of just talk about this tree as a whole because you can actually choose between all 3 of these options. I actually personally usually play with Caltrops, so I'll talk about that first. So essentially Caltrops is an ability that allows you to obviously throw Caltrops back. You kind of leap backwards, so it's a short range dash, about comparable to your spacebar evade, essentially. And more importantly, it creates a area of slowing for 50%. For 6 seconds. So that's really useful. Again, you're slowing people down. I believe that stacks with your shots. So it really helps to keep people still. So that's really nice. More to the point, however, you've got enhanced caltrops. Enemies take 3%
modifier.
increased damage every second that they're in caltrops. And again, this has no limit other than the duration, which of course is 6 seconds. So if you manage to keep someone in those caltrops, obviously, you know, you've got 3 times 6, you're having an 18% increased damage basically to that target by the time it expires. So that is like quite significant. Of course, that's a decent chunk of damage. As for the morph, I would usually go for disciplined caltrops. You essentially have a 5% crit chance increase against enemies inside of the caltrops, and then you double that amount against vulnerable enemies. So now we're starting to see some synergies
all the time. So.
Exactly. So we're starting to see some synergies here. We're getting a 10% crit strike chance increase while they're in the caltrops. That's like absolutely insane. Obviously, you only need 100% in order to just crit all the time. So that's literally 10% of what you need to hit that 100 mark, which is very, very nice. Very potent indeed. I'll just kind of skim through these two here. So essentially, dash is what I usually use if I need more mobility. I found myself using dash a lot more on harder content. So I have recently just hit World Tier 4. And in like boss fights that require you to be very mobile, like the capstone boss fight, dash is an absolute godsend, of course. You get 2 charges, you basically zoom across the fields, lets you reposition very nicely. Very, very cool. Nice and simple. Of course, the enhanced dash makes it so that enemies take 15% increased critical strike damage from you for 5 seconds. So if it's safe to do so, I wouldn't like really bank on this, but if it is safe to do so, I would recommend, of course, like dashing through the pack to try and like get that on them. It's 15%, it's nothing to shake a stick at. Methodical dash also lets you reduce the charge cooldown by 0.5 depending on how many people you hit, up to 3 seconds, as long as they are crowd controlled. Again, if they're there should be crowd controlled if you're shooting at them, because we've got a lot of slows, we've got a lot of like knockdowns and such, so that can be useful. Honestly, I do also like disciplined dash. It's a matter of preference. Dash ends up slowing enemies. So again, if there's lots of fast...
days.
Yes. So if there's lots of fast enemies or like really problematic enemies, there's sort of these enemies that are very... they kind of are rush down barbarian type enemies that kind of jump at you. I'm not sure if you know the ones. They're very, very dangerous. So this can be quite useful for slowing them down. And if they're already slowed, you get a daze, which is obviously quite nice. And then finally, we can talk about Shadow Step. I'll admit, I've not really used this, but I have been meaning to give it a try. So the main thing about Shadow Step is, of course, it lets you do the classic roguish teleport behind you. You deal a little bit of damage and you gain some movement speed. But the important thing about Shadow Step is that you become unstoppable. So one thing that will kill you on the rogue, any rogue build will tell you, if you get CC'd, that is your worst enemy, right? As a squishy class, I'm sure as a sorcerer, you understand that as well.
Yeah.
Unstoppable skills are an absolute godsend, especially on like hardcore for anyone who's playing that, because you can use them while you're CC'd and they break your CC. Yep. So if you're finding that the enemies that you're fighting, of course, have a lot of CC moves, things that are getting you killed because you're just kind of standing there and not doing anything, Shadow Step can really help alleviate that. Of course, you've got the enhanced Shadow Step, which increases your crit strike chance. That can be pretty useful against bosses. And then as for the two sort of choices you've got here, enemies damaged by Shadow Step are stunned for 2 seconds. Could be very nice again for stunning an elite that's maybe very dangerous. And then Shadow Step's cooldown is reduced by 3 seconds when it damages an enemy you have not hit with Shadow Step in the last 4 seconds. Matter of preference. Do you want more Shadow Steps? Do you want the CC? Completely up to you. Moving on to the passives, however. So the main passive, I will say, in this tree, and I wouldn't recommend grabbing. I would recommend grabbing the 2 passives I'm about to speak about first, and then skipping the other 2, and then grabbing them last. But essentially, weapon mastery, very important. Definitely grab it.
Straight up damage.
Yeah, yep. You basically just gain flat bonuses depending on what weapons you're using. So, of course, the main kind of damage, we use our what would you call them, our swords as stat sticks. So that doesn't really matter too much, like the dagger versus like swords thing. We don't really care about that. What we're looking at is bows and crossbows. So this build actually works best with crossbows because you get that 15% increased critical strike damage. That is just very, very nice to stack up. But bows are fine as well. 12% increased damage to vulnerable is not terrible by any means. Of course, it's just vulnerable while we can apply a lot of it isn't up 24/7, right? Whereas crit chances, this build gets very high. So yeah, crossbows are probably better, but I am using a bow at the minute because love the aesthetic and it's the best thing that I've got. So yeah, I would definitely recommend.
It's nice to do something a little different than everyone else as well. And if it works, which this does, then it's extra good.
Yeah, exactly that. I would then also say put some points into concussive. After you knock back or knock down an enemy, you gain 12% increased critical strike chance against them for 3 seconds. Now,
the synergies are starting to stack up.
There you go. They're all stacking up. So this is insane, especially against elites, of course, because we are knocking them down constantly. So against elites, you just have 12% increased critical strike chance. Like, that's just like a fact for you. As long as you're obviously keeping on top of your energy management. Now, knockback is, of course, only really going to apply if you're using, what's it called? Forceful arrow here, like we mentioned. But still very much worth it for the knockdown. Against elites, that's kind of where you want your crits anyway. So very, very potent. These passives, again, much less important. I recommend getting them once you've got with your last few skill points, but they are still important. They're for survivability. So you put 1 point into rugged, 5% damage reduction against damage over time effects. That is literally just to get to the next one, of course, because it's hidden behind rugged, which gives us reactive defense, gain 18% damage reduction while inflicted with control impairing effects. So again, really, really nice to have, just to kind of try and give you a bit of survivability if you do end up getting CC'd, because it will happen. There's no way around it. So yeah, this would be my recommendation, but these are definitely not important. I would say these are like nice to have.
Yeah, your bonus skill points after you've done all your renown and got all the extra points and stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And of course, you know, if you wanted to instead, you could consider taking these 4 points, maybe putting them into dash, like just so you have a better cooldown, or like one of your other skills. That could be a good place to put those points. So moving on, we then have the Subterfuge tree. So again, just a couple passives and one thing in general that we want here. So Dark Shroud. This is honestly one of the best abilities that Rogue has. I would be remiss to not include this on pretty much every build. They did actually just recently nerf it, but it's still very good. Essentially, as you guys have probably seen, I've got these little kind of shadows swirling around my character. That's what this is. So you surround yourself with 5 shadows. You gain 8% damage reduction per active shadow. So that's 40% all in all, once they're all up. And each time you take direct damage, the damage is reduced by your damage reduction, and then a shadow gets consumed. So if you take one, hit, you will have like 50% damage reduction, and then it will drop down to 32, and then like so on and so forth. So you want to keep this up as much as possible. Rogue is very squishy without this, and essentially you shouldn't really be getting hit too much as a rogue anyway, because you've got a ton of mobility. But for those glancing blows, of course, Diablo fills the screen with a ton of energy, loads of like, area of effects. You're gonna get hit. This just kind of saves you from those glancing blows, basically, right?
I think as well, like, you can't sleep on a defensive move like this when you're in World Tier 4.
Yes.
And, like, where we are now, we're about level 60-ish. And if you're in World Tier 4, that means they're all higher level than you. They're literally going to one-shot you with certain things. So having a massive damage reduction thing like that, and the previous passive you've shown, might just mean you just don't get one-shot in those instances, and then you can just keep going. But you do still have to obviously be careful and pay attention to all the nuts stuff on the screen. Yeah,
no, that is exactly it. Like, so Dark Shroud, very invaluable for that reason. Enhanced Dark Shroud is very nice as well. 10% chance that when you get hit, they don't get consumed. Again, just nice to have. Now, this is the big one. Subverting Dark Shroud. Each active shadow from Dark Shroud grants you 4% increased movement speed. So that is 4 times 5. That is a 20% movement speed increase. Absolutely insane. Like, you move very, very quickly with this up, as well as some of the other movement speed bonuses that you guys have been seeing. With a lot of the sort of substats on your gear. Stuff like when you kill elites to get movement speed, you can very easily hit the 200 cap if you build for it, and I would recommend doing so. Being able to kite is, again, one of Rogue's best features. So definitely have fun with it. I absolutely love going fast. So yeah, this is
just
very,
twinging through dungeons.
That is exactly it. And then we can get on to the passives here. So exploit. 18% increased damage to healthy and injured enemies. Of course, healthy characters are anyone over 80% HP. Injured characters are anyone within 35% of the bottom of their life, basically. So just, you do more damage when something is fresh, and you do more damage when you're going to execute something. Just very, very useful to have. It's flat damage. Take it. Then you've got Malice. You deal 9% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. So again, vulnerable damage... Vulnerable damage stacking. Super, super nice. Not much more to really say about it, but yeah. Both of these are incredibly...
Just flat damage increases. Like, yeah, you just want as much damage as you can get. Like, they're just two very good skills. You don't see that on some of the other classes where you have, like, a back-to-back, straight-up, big percentage modified of bonus damage. So, you know, Rogue, Rogue is meant to put out the damage, but you are squishy as a trade-off.
That is it. That's Rogue for you. But yeah, these are probably your two most important passives, I would say. Like, very, very potent passives. We then get to probably my favorite tree. I absolutely love this part of the Rogue. This is the Imbuement skills. So essentially, Rogue has skills. You can see I'm using two. I'm using Shadow and Poison. That can imbue some of their abilities, their core and some of their agility abilities with a certain elemental type. So it stops doing physical damage and starts doing that elemental type, and then there's some goodies along the way. So let's start with...
Just real quick, do these stack together?
They do not, unfortunately.
Okay, so you're using one, when it goes off, you have the other one to pop.
That is correct. And I will kind of explain a little bit about when you should use them and in what situations. So essentially here we've got AoE and we've got single target damage. That's the function of both. So Shadow Imbuement is your AoE pack clearing nuke button, basically, right? So what it does is the next two imbuable skills, which in our case, you're going to obviously want to be using these on your penetrating shot. Become shadow damage, and they infect enemies for 6 seconds with like a shadow curse, basically. Those enemies then, when they die, explode and deal additional damage to all surrounding enemies. So you can kind of maybe understand from that the chain reaction of just blowing up a screen comes from when you just, like, you destroy little Timmy, the demon, and he blows up, and then he blows up his friends, and those friends then also explode, and it just cascades. It's absolutely amazing to see. Yeah, also, if you don't manage to kill them, it does just apply that damage to the enemy anyway, basically. So it's still nice for single target stuff, still useful against bosses, but of course it's kind of like backloaded damage in that it takes 6 seconds for it to pop if they've not died. So yeah, this is just your screen clearer, essentially. If we go to our passives here, for Shadow Imbuement, you've got Enhanced Shadow Imbuement. 15% increased critical strike chance against injured enemies that are infected by Shadow Imbuement. So again, if you've got like a massive pack just super low, they are essentially going to be, much more critable. You're going to be doing more damage, and then you're going to be able to, of course, because they're infected with the shadow, you're going to be able to actually execute them, have them blow up, and then deal more damage to their friends. So again, kind of helps with the nuke. And then in terms of choice here, we want Blended Shadow Imbuement. Which again, vulnerable. It's that golden word. Essentially, when
another way to get it.
Yep, that's it. So when they explode, anything left that is still standing will be vulnerable for 2 seconds. Really, really good way to just kind of blanket the field, if you will, with vulnerable. Very, very potent option here. I'll just quickly, just because it is relevant to Shadow Imbuement, I'll go into its passives that also kind of like go with it. So we've got Shadow Crash here. Just a single point. Shadow damage has a 10% chance to stun for 0.5 seconds on lucky hit. Again, this is kind of like a gateway point tax, if you will. It's a nice to have. You get a little stun, can interrupt actions It's whatever. But the main one that we're here for is consuming shadows. You only really need 1 point in this, honestly. You probably don't need more, but of course, if you're having energy issues, this is a place you could consider putting some of those extra points. Each time you kill an enemy with shadow damage, you generate 10 energy. So again, you can imagine...
And when you blow up a whole group of regular mobs, you're just refunding
all your stuff. All energy just goes back. So this is a complete reset of your energy. It is absolutely glorious. Okay, so just to kind of give more context to the ability again. So yeah, you would use this mainly... you would use this first on packs of mobs. This is your AoE clear. If you are going up against single targets, you would prioritize Poison Imbuement instead. So Poison Imbuement, much like Shadow, does the same thing, but it makes it poison instead of Shadow, and it essentially applies a poison damage over time to that enemy. So of course, lots of damage, very good against single target. If we go to Enhanced Poison Imbuement, the duration is increased by a second. Just nice to have, means they're going to take a little bit more damage from the dot. And then Blended Poison Imbuement makes it so that critical strikes with poison imbued skills deal 75% increased poisoning damage. So again, so poisoning damage,
that's
of course,
a big modifier.
Yes, 75% is nothing to shake a stick at. So again, like if we go back, they apply 168% of the base damage as additional poisoning damage. So that's the damage over time. And then if you crit 75, it gives you 75% increased. So it's like, that is like massive. I've seen health bars at half on an elite just completely turn green, and if obviously I tried to kill them quickly, but if I were to just leave that mob alone, they would die within 6 seconds. So very, very potent. I will just give an honorable mention to Mixed Poison Imbuement here as well. This is also pretty good if you build more for Lucky Hit. So poison imbued skills have up to a 30% chance to apply double the amount of poisoning damage over time. So they're basically the same flavor. Like double is like obviously much more than 75. That would be, you know, something like 300 and I want to say 20%. Just napkin math there. But of course you have to get a lucky hit, and then it's a 30% chance. So
the thing about lucky hit is we're talking really small percentages if you don't really stack it as your substat or have a class that has it as passives. So like I can speak as a sorcerer a lot. I do stack lucky hit, and it even has passives that give you more lucky hit. But if you're building it for that, then you would basically want it on pretty much almost every gear piece to get your lucky hit. Like base chance probably above about 60% is probably where you want it to be, if not higher.
Yeah, no, exactly that. You want it to be at the very least like every other shot. But yeah, so that's the imbuement stuff. We do also have this passive here, which is also very important. Precision Imbuement. Imbued skills gain 9% increased critical strike chance. So again, we're stacking up that crit strike chance. It's very nice. So once you've got your imbued skills running, that's an additional 9% chance to crit. Very, very nice.
And then your previous passive was giving your crossbows crit damage. It's all working together.
Yep, exactly that. Okay, so we're going to go into the ultimate tree. So this build actually does not use an ultimate. And the reason for that is just because this build is just very sort of cooldown light. So it's got very short cooldowns, relying on a longer cooldown ultimate just isn't really going to do as much for you as taking both imbuements would say. And then everything else is, of course, you need your movement skill, you need puncture, you need shroud, and you need piercing shots. There's just no space for an ultimate in this build, in my opinion at the very least. But we do have some passives. So first we're going to have a look at innovation. So on lucky hit, which this build does have a decent amount of, you have a 30% chance to gain 8 energy. So just again, like this is kind of again something you can shift around, extra points. But this is really nice just to kind of help out with resource generation if you feel like you're a bit low and you've got the lucky hit to support it. But the kind of bigger passives are down here. So we've got Adrenaline Rush, which again, this is just attacks. But while moving, you gain 5% increased energy regeneration. Very nice. Rogues are always on the move. Nothing more to say on that. But then we've got Haste. So while at or above 50% maximum energy, you gain an additional 15% increased movement speed. So again, we've stacked something like 40%.
So much move speed.
We've got
so
something
jealous.
like 40
I feel
to
so
50%.
slow.
It's crazy. And then while below 50% maximum energy, you gain 15% increased attack speed. And the reason that's significant is because if we manage to get below 50% energy, we are in desperate need of energy. That, of course, makes it easier for us to get our puncture out, which is going to be restoring some of our energy, of course. So that is, nice little synergy there. And then finally, the big one, so our key passives, we go for precision. So essentially what this does is critical strikes with marksman skills, which in our case is basically our penetrating shot, our piercing shot. They grant you a stack of precision. You gain 4% increased critical strike damage per stack of precision up to a maximum of 20. So, you can have 5 stacks. When you reach maximum precision, which is 5, your next marksman skill is a guaranteed critical strike that deals 40% increased critical strike damage and then consumes all stacks of precision. So,
yeah, you're ramping up with it,
yeah.
and then you're dealing a big hit, but also the whole time you have more crit strike damage.
That is exactly it. If I'm being honest, this isn't even something I really track. It just kind of works. So, don't feel the need to sort of track how many stacks you have. It just kind of works. I'll be honest with you. But yeah, that is pretty much it for the for the skill tree. Yeah.
Thanks for the rundown and explaining everything, because there are a few skills on here that I wasn't sure what they do. But I'm interested for your specialization choices.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, here I've gone for combo points. So what this does is anytime you use your basic skill, you generate just combo points. You can kind of see the meter down here. And each combo point augments your core skills in a certain way. Usually it's more damage. So for us, it pretty much doubles the damage also. You can kind of see it here. So as you can see, we get an increase to damage, and in fact we get an increase to lucky hit chance as well. With 3 points, it's a 213% damage increase and a 30% lucky hit chance increase, taking our lucky hit to 80%. So very potent. It's good to kind of state with this build, you never want to shoot without 3 combo points. It's a bit of a waste to do so. Obviously, maybe if you're going to finish someone off, then fine. But yeah, you want to be building up those combo points. You're going to do significantly less damage if you don't play around this mechanic. So very important. Very
okay, so you want to keep an eye on it, basically, as you're doing your combo.
Yeah, that is correct.
I like the sound of combo points, actually, building up those points and then chunking them down for a big hit.
I'd say
but I am really interested in your gear as well. Mm-hmm. So how many gear pieces do you have that are good? Have you got all your perfect substats? Because you are shredding elites quite well. So what kind of gear have you got? So
funny enough, I'm actually not that well geared. Honestly, the main things that I have is I have some core aspects, but if I just kind of mouse over some of these, you can see I'm using just some rare, sacred rare pieces. A lot of these don't even have legendaries. I've got some uniques. But yeah, I would say there's maybe only a few things that are core here. Substats wise, I've got some decent rolls, but let's talk about aspects first. So let's start with our weapon. So on your two-handed weapon, you're going to want to be using the Edge Master's aspect. Of course, we put it on the two-hander because that doubles the efficacy of the legendary ability. But what Edge Masters does is skills deal up to between 20 and 40% increased damage based on your available primary resource when cast, receiving the maximum benefit when you have full primary resource. Again, because we want to be playing in a way that keeps our resources full, we're going to more often than not be benefiting from the full efficacy of this. Again, so for me, that's going to be a 32% increase with the knockdown if we're hitting an elite while it's full. But yeah, this is probably one of the bigger things you want for sure. Another core piece is going to be the Trick Shot Amulet. The build pretty much does not work without it. This is, I would say, tied for the most important. So what it does is when penetrating shot damages an enemy, 2 additional arrows split off to either side. These side arrows deal, in my case, 20% of penetrating shots base damage and do not split. So this is what allows us to actually nuke the entire screen. This is what is allowing us to turn penetrating shot from just a straight arrow through like a ton of enemies into I'm going to blanket the screen in arrows and do a lot of damage. This one you want to throw on your amulet again, because amulet slot is a 50% increase to the efficacy of your legendaries. So those are like the two most important ones. Make sure you're putting trick shot on your amulet. Make sure you're putting edge master on your bow. Very, very important concept. Other than that though, the other thing that is pretty good is we've got rapid. So this is essentially your basic skills gain increased attack speed. Helps us build up combo points very quickly. Helps us get more energy back with puncture. All that good stuff. Anything that kind of like increases your basic attack speed is pretty good as well. And then Expectant is also very potent, I would say. Attacking enemies with a basic skill increases the damage of your next core skill cast by, again, in my case, 7% up to 30%. So each time, you know, before you cast your core skill, Penetrating Shot, you're going to want to obviously use your basic skill 3 times. So if you had like a max roll of this, you'd be getting just a nice flat 30% increase to your damage each time you fire, right? On top of all the other
And
benefits.
you're attacking with your basics to build combo points.
That's exactly
which is then also giving you the damage there, so that they actually synergize perfectly.
Yeah, it's a perfect synergy, exactly. Everything else, honestly, I don't really have anything kind of crazy. I'll just quickly talk about Disobedience. This is just a really nice way to give yourself some armor, so you get extra armor whenever you deal any form of damage, stacking up to 50%. You're constantly attacking. Nice way to add a little bit of survivability, but yeah. Again, I've not got all the kind of survivability things I would want. I think in terms of aspects that I would maybe also want on this gear, you probably want to look at, I can't remember what their names are right now, but one is, I think, Conceited. But it's essentially the barrier package is what I like to call it. So just the one that gives you a barrier whenever you're attacking elites, and then the one that makes it so that whenever you've got a barrier, you do more damage, right? That can add a little bit of damage.
The gist of it is, you don't even have an aspect on every piece of gear. There's a few that could be optimized in there, but you're still shredding things, which just sort of shows how strong, I guess, the rogue is, but also that your particular layout of the build here.
Yeah.
So I kind of think it's time that we go in the dungeon and check it out for ourselves and see how quickly you kill things.
Cool. So let's just quickly buff up here. So imbuement skills do not drop off, so it's usually good to sort of like, you know, pre-pot or like kind of pre-buff.
I'll get your cooldown back.
And get your cooldowns back. I'm actually, if you just excuse me, going to switch to Caltrops because I do prefer that to Dash. As Dash and Shadow Step actually will use up your imbuement if you have to use them in a pinch, whereas Caltrops does not do that.
Okay.
So just as a heads up. But yeah, all right, let's go.
No problem. So we're going to demo this in World Tier 3, but we have actually been playing on World Tier 4 as well. This build does work on World Tier 4, but obviously because we're like level, you know, around level 60, it means most things, and it's the same for my Sorcerer. We can destroy the elites in seconds, but if we get tagged by one stray arrow, we're so squishy we just instantly die. So this does work on World Tier 4, but it demos a lot better on World Tier 3 until we get about 10-15 more levels, because once you meet the level of the mob, they're not going to start one-shotting you anymore, but
that's exactly
you've got to see how the build plays better in World Tier 3, but it still works in World Tier 4.
Complete misclick there.
Counter drop. Wow! It's like, alright, counter drops are slow, we're building it, and then boom.
Yep, that's it. So, what's it called? A little bit of a misclick there, but yeah, it kind of
alright, Vestmore, I love to see this, right? You have my playstyle. You skip the trash mobs, you're going straight through the packs. That's what I love to see. We're doing independent. I love how it spreads so... So each time it pierces, does it also branch?
No, so it does. That would be absolutely beautiful if that was the case, but unfortunately not. So yeah, we're just gonna pre-pot. You know, you wanna gather. Don't make the mistake. I was
just saying, basically.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, we're sort of talking each other over here. I'm just too excited. I haven't seen a rogue build quite like this before. Each time you kill an elite, it's almost like they're a trash mob because they just explode. That's what I was gonna say.
That's it. I'd also like to add, of course, if you've got, you know, gear stats such as... Oh, these bloody flies, I hate them. If you've got gear stats such as... such as, like, you know, damage on elite kill or just anything on elite kill, this can be really potent for farming, of course.
Boom. Oh, it's so satisfying.
It's very
this is the thing,
satisfying,
right? There's a lot of builds out there that are sort of very mundane in how they play, and that you are literally just holding down click, for example. So I always try and find builds that not only are effective at just wiping stuff. Yeah, but they're fun to play, but they also are effective in an actual dungeon, and they're not just bad. So when you actually have something that's like you're building combo points and stacking damage, and then you're popping the whole screen, it's got a payoff, you know.
Yeah. No, 100%. It's really cool, man. Like I've been really enjoying this build. Like I've basically been using it since like leveling as well. So you know, viable from the beginning of the game. You guys
I have to say I'm so jealous of this move speed.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we twing him.
Rogues don't need a mount. You don't even need a mount. You're already quicker.
I'd like to add as well that technically speaking, this is the like slowest version of this build, as I'm not using dash. This is pure run speed.
All right, here's a ton of elites. Boom. Whoa. It's like basically one cast just annihilates them.
That is pretty much it, yeah. It can be like, so another thing I will kind of emphasize is, yeah, we got a little legendary there. I will emphasize that positioning is kind of key here. Like if you get bad positioning, you will have a little bit of a bad time, which is why I am kind of running through mobs and trying to sort of get them, you know, to follow me and to clump up. So yeah, just make sure you're not kind of like just running into mobs and then, you know, hitting them while they're all spread out and stuff, because you want that. That's what you want, where you just absolutely annihilate all of them.
I think that will come with just a bit of time of playing the build, right? Because it's got a very specific spread, and I think that's why the caltrops work very well with it. But again, if you are going up to World Tier 4, then dash might end up being the better option until you hit that level 70 to 75 sort of area.
So I'm actually looking for the door here. We found both keystones. Oh, really nice.
Big attack here. Boom.
So that was with the poison imbuement, as you can see. Like a little bit better for single targets and elites. And then Shadow is there we go. As you can see, that dude was just standing there as well. Like it's because he was constantly knocked down. Like literally can't do a thing.
It's hard to see that, like, because there's so much effects on the screen and the ricocheting and stuff. It's hard to see it, but yeah, that when you actually hit them with that, they just stop moving.
Yep, it's really, really cool. If we find something that's like
dungeon,
more
there's loads of running around. What? Some dungeons. It's weird how some dungeons are like massive and other ones are more like small with individual corridors. I think you've actually killed like pretty much all the elites already.
I think I have. Yeah, I just need to go get the other key. A little bit of greed. I'll grab that later. All right, cool. So let's
You're totally right with what you were saying before as well. Your cooldowns are mostly up, you know, one way or the other for the Imbuement. So you not have it. There's not really not very much downtime at all in terms of like when you can like blow up a group of enemies.
Because that's the thing. Like I've seen like some other builds and other classes and stuff. I've obviously been playing with like sorcerers and another rogue and such. And like they've got like ultimate abilities, and they, you know, maybe will be putting up more burst damage than even I'm doing. But then they've got a massive downtime, and I hate builds like that, man. I want to be able to just twing things 24/7. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you don't want to have to stop and like, oh, there's an elite in this room. Can we just wait 20 seconds?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So yeah, another thing I'll say is just make sure you're also like putting up your shadows. I've obviously got 3. I'm waiting for the cooldown. That's probably the biggest cooldown you have. And then here we go. So we're about to fight the boss. So I'm actually going to switch to poison here, because poison is what you want. Ooh, nice caltrops damage. And then yeah, I'll also kind of add the importance of just kind of like alternating between imbuments.
It's a 1-2-3 combo, this build, isn't it?
That's it. There we go, boom.
And he's dead. Well, I've got to say, I've been loving my sorcerer as my favorite class, but I am very heavily entertaining the idea of making a rogue ult, because it just looks fun. You've got so much damage focusing things. Like I think I kind of want to try it for myself, you know.
Honestly, it's worth it, man. Like just roll up a rogue, join the rogue gang, okay? Rogue meta.
Definitely. Now, guys, if you want to check out Vest more, he's over on Twitch. He will be linked down below in the description. So definitely check him out if you want to catch his rogue live and anything else that he's doing over there. It's a great time, so definitely tune in. Hit the like button down below as well if you want more builds. We can bring you guys different themed builds around all different kinds of stuff. Just tell us what you want in the comments down below. And the 2 videos on screen now, we think you'll really enjoy if you did enjoy this video. You don't have to watch them if you don't want to, but if you did like this one, you're probably going to like these ones too. And then tell us what you think after watching in the comments down below.